Hello again everyone, this is Dave Thomas and today I am building the Tank Buster 5 from Rocketarium. This is a bazooka looking type of rocket. I don't know if it's actually based on a real weapon, but it looks close. So let's go ahead and open this up and check our instructions here. So we have a body tube, parachute, and the parachute might be stuck inside your instruction book. Okay, we have a small parts bag here, and this includes the fin material, the squares of balsa there. We have a pre-assembled ejection baffle, rubber shock cord, launch lug, engine spacer, engine block, and a centering ring there. Okay, this is an adapter that will reduce the diameter of the upper body tube down to that of the lower body tube. And then we have a nose cone, and then some adhesive decals here. It's all white, but it says TB5. So it looks like we have everything we need. I'm going to clear this away and we will get started. One other thing that I just found that's on our parts list is this balsa stick. This is simply used for getting glue into tighter places, and mine was inside the main body tube there. So our first task is to mark the body tube, and this is going to get a little bit cramped here because we're going to have 6 marks on a BT20 tube. And so to do this, we're going to stand this up directly right on top of that guide. Alright, and then take a pencil here and make marks for each fin. The main body tube there. So our first task is to mark the body tube, and this is going to get a little bit cramped here because we're going to have 6 marks. And then we also need to mark for the launch lug, which will be halfway between 2 of the fin marks. Okay, next you're going to need a straight edge, and a door frame is traditionally used. I've got this handy little jig here from Estes though, and so we need to extend each of our fin lines about 2 inches up the rocket. Now the launch lug line, I'm going to extend the entire length because it's actually going to be used for sighting, because the launch lug itself is on the upper body tube. But this just gives us a sight line so that we make sure that it's positioned between 2 of the fins. Alright, so that was that line. The other ones only need to go up about 2 inches here. We need to extend each of our fin lines about 2 inches up the rocket. Now the launch lug line, I'm going to extend the entire length. Okay. Something else to do at this point is to roughen up the area where the fins are going to attach, and just use some fine sandpaper for this, and it doesn't take a lot. All I'm doing here is just giving a few strokes over my lines, and this just helps break up the glossiness of the glassine surface and gives a better surface for the glue to hold. Alright, if you happen to sand away your pencil marks, you can just go back and put new ones in. But it doesn't really require that much. Okay, and you don't need to sand the launch lug line. As I said, this is just a sight line. Now, one other thing we can do at this point, it actually shows this in the instructions later on, but we can make a mark on each of our lines that is 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters from the aft end. And this is where the aft edge of each fin will attach. So we're going to have this little bit of space. This just helps break up the glossiness of the glassine surface and gives a better surface for the glue to hold. There we go. So now when we do get to the fin attachment point, we'll be all ready to go. For the next part here, we're going to attach the transition coupler here onto the main body tube. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is simply dry fit this. Okay, so this needs to go all the way through. There we go, like that. Okay, and then this centering ring here will go over that. Okay, and so what we can do now to see how it's going to fit is just go ahead and press this down. Alright, so in its final glued on state, that's how it's going to look. Okay, so we can go ahead and pull that back off for a moment. Okay, and now we're going to pull this backward about 1/2 inch, basically so it's just touching the inside there. I don't know if you can see that or not. Come up a little bit here. Okay, so I'm just going to draw that back. Alright, and then I'm going to put on some glue here. So I'm going to use wood glue. White glue will work as well. And for the first part, I'm going to put a bead of glue on the inside. And this one, you want this to be fairly generous so that when we push this through, it fills in the little valleys inside that. Okay, and then we're going to put a smaller amount here. And so this, I'm going to use my finger to smear this up. Alright, and now we're using a twisting motion here to bring this up. Alright, and this should extend about 1/8 inch, so about that much. And now we want to immediately remove excess glue that's coming out of here and into the tube here. So I've got a big old blob of glue there. Use wood glue, white glue will work as well. And for the first part, I'm going to put a bead of glue inside, and this one, you want this to be fairly generous, so when we put this ring is going to go on here. And now this is mainly getting glued to this plastic surface here, and so the wood glue won't work quite as well. Alright, the other thing, we've still got some glue down here. I'm just going to wipe this off as well with a cleaner tissue. There we go. Okay, now according to the instructions, if you like, you can sand this smooth. I actually like the texture of the 3D print, so I'm going to leave mine on there. Okay, so up here where the centering ring is going to go, I'm going to use some thick cyanoacrylate instead of wood glue, so that presumably I will get a better bond. run some right around the tube and just kind of smear it outward here. Okay, and then this will pop right onto that. Okay, and then I'm just going to hold this here for 30 to 60 seconds while it sets up, and then we'll come back and continue with the belt. Next, we can get ready to install the ejection baffle, and the first thing we need to do here is simply tie on the shock cord. And if you'd like to substitute Kevlar, now would be the time to do that. I'm going to go ahead and use the supplied shock cord here. So just tie a double knot in the shock cord, stretch it both directions. Alright, and then we're going to put a small dot of glue on that to make sure it does not unravel. Use white or wood glue for this, as super glue will damage the rubber and weaken it. Okay, and I'm just going to work that into the knot a little bit. Alright, and then remove from the free end all but about a 1/4 inch or 5 to 6 millimeters of the rubber. Okay, this is going to go into the forward end of the transition here, so I'm just going to dry fit this to begin with. So that's going to go in just like that. I'm going to pull it back out, and here you can use either the balsa stick that came with the kit or some other form of applicator here. I've got this long cotton swab. And what I'm going to do is put a bead of glue down inside here, and I'm going to do this so it's just above the aft ring here on this. So I'm just going to stick this in and then squish it around there. Okay, and that allows me to slide this in, and then I'm going to put a bead of glue on the top ring there. So a bead of glue right here. And you want to do this fairly quickly so the glue inside does not set up. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and push that all the way in, give it a little bit of a turn there. Okay, and then we'll let that set up. Over at the aft end of the rocket, we can put in the engine block. And so we're going to need for that the thrust ring and the yellow engine spacer. And now I'm going to take my applicator again, and if you don't have one of these, you can use that balsa stick that came with the kit. Alright, and I want this to go about 2.5 inches into the body tube. So I'm just going to take my ruler here and put that at about 2.5 inches, put my thumb there. Alright, I'm just going to insert this in without touching the walls, and then apply it over the wall there, and then we'll put this in and use the spacer. So I'm going to push the spacer in until it's flush, and then immediately pull that out again so we don't glue it inside. And now the engine block just needs to set up for a little bit, and we can come back to the forward end of the rocket once more. Alright, now we need the upper body tube, and once more we're going to add some glue to it. Okay, and this is just going to go right around the inside of the aft end of that upper tube. And this can be relatively heavy because it's going to fill in these grooves around the shoulder here, and that's what's going to help hold that in place. If you want, you could also use thick cyanoacrylate glue here. Alright, now we're going to move the shock cord through this. I'm going to try not to get too much glue on it. So I'm just going to pull this through. Alright, and then we're just going to insert the transition and just kind of go back and forth a little bit there and scrape off any excess glue. Okay, and now we're going to let everything dry for about 15 to 20 minutes. While the glue is drying on the airframe, we can come back to our instructions here and prepare the fins. So our fins are just square pieces of balsa here, and what we need to do is first sand the surfaces here, just to remove any high parts in the grain and things like that. And then we also need to round off the leading edge. Now, these just can't go on in any direction. The grain should be parallel with the leading edge. So if this is against the body tube, it would go on like this, not like this. When it's in this configuration, it's really easy to break. Alright, so I'm going to start out here and just take some fine sandpaper. These are pretty thick fins, so you just put these on a flat surface with the sandpaper and just sand them back and forth a little bit. Turn them over and do the same thing. Okay. And then repeat this with each of the fins. When you have them all smooth, then take and round off the leading edge here and things like that. And then we also need to round off the leading edge. Now, these just can't go on in any direction. The grain should be parallel with the leading edge. So if this is against the body, okay, so there's one fin, and we just need to repeat this 5 times for the other ones, and I will do that off camera. I've sanded all of the fins and rounded their leading edges here. If you wish to seal the fins with sanding sealer or wood filler, now would be the time to do that. For the sake of expediency in this video, though, I'm going to content myself with merely sanding the fins. Next, we're going to put them on, and you'll want to have your wood glue and a tissue or two handy. So here we'll simply take one of the fins, and we're going to run a small bead of glue here, and then smooth that out. Too much glue can create problems here. And now I'm simply going to put this along one of the fin lines, and remember we want this a 1/4 inch from the aft end of the rocket here. Alright, I'm going to set that on. Now I'm going to take this off, wait for about 60 seconds, and then put it back on again. "60 seconds have passed, and now I'm going to put the fin back on. And what this has done is allowed the glue on both sides to become tacky, so that now when I put the fin on, it stays in place. And now I'm just going to make sure that the fin is perpendicular and in line with the fin lines. I'm going to let that dry for about 5 to 10 minutes and then repeat the process with the other 5 fins. And I'll do that off camera. While the glue on the fins is drying, we can proceed to the nose cone. And depending on how much effort you want to put into this, you can just leave the nose cone alone. You can do a little bit of sanding to prepare it for painting, or you can do a little bit more. Okay, so this nose cone has a seam on both sides from the molding process, and up here toward the tip there's kind of a little bit of a valley and a dip in here. And again, if you don't care about it, you can just ignore it. But one of the options we have is we can fill that in with some plastic modeling putty. Now before we do that part, I'm going to go ahead and roughen up the plastic. And I'm going to do this in 2 steps. In the instructions it shows using 200 grit sandpaper for this. I'm first going to use 150 grit to help knock down any material on the seams here. And then I will fill in the remaining seams with plastic model putty. And once that's dry, then I'll use the 200 or 220 grit sandpaper on it. Okay, so quickly here, I'm just going to do a quick sanding around both sides from the molding process. And up here toward the tip, there's kind of a little bit of a valley and a dip in here. And again, if you don't care about it, you can just ignore it. But one of the options we have is we can fill that. Alright, so that's roughened it up a bit there. And now I'm just going to wipe that down with a little bit of rubbing alcohol on some tissue. And this will just help remove any sanding dust quicker. Okay. Now if you haven't done any of the Rocketarium kits before, all of their nose cones tend to be of this type. It's not polystyrene like you would find in an Estes kit. Instead, this is, I think it's polypropylene or a polyethylene polypropylene mixture. And what this means is that paint does not stick well to it. And so if you're going to paint the rocket at all, you definitely want to do this sanding step, as it will help the paint adhere. Alright, now I'm going to use some plastic model putty. And you can get this at most hobby stores. There's several brands of it. Mine is Testers. Any brand will work. But here I'm just going to run this along the area here where we had the biggest seam remnants. And you can just smooth this in with a finger. This is water soluble and it dries really quickly. So you want to do this step fairly fast. And it's okay if you got lumps and stuff on this, this will sand out. Alright, and then I'm going to do the same thing here on the other side. But wipe off your fingers first, because if you have partially dried stuff on your finger and then you go to do another coat over here, that'll tend to mess things up. Alright, and I'm putting quite a bit right at the tip, because this one in particular is a big low spot there. Alright, and now I'm going to let this dry for about 30 to 60 minutes. You want it completely dry before sanding it. While I'm waiting for the nose cone putty to dry, I'm going to assemble the parachute here. Now, if you've seen any of my other videos, you know I don't like tying the parachute directly to the nose cone like they show here. If you want to do that, then just follow the instructions as shown, and that will go on fairly simply. What I prefer is to use a snap swivel that allows me to change out the parachute readily. And it also, at least in theory, helps take some of the twisting out of the parachute as it's coming down. So to start with, gather all 3 of the parachute shroud lines here around one finger. And then with your other hand, hold on to the middle of the parachute sheet itself. And then just make small adjustments with your fingers until all of the parachute corners are close to lined up there. Alright, then back here on this side, I'm going to pinch the shroud lines into a loop, and at no time do I let that loop completely go. That way I don't move the length. And now take a snap swivel that you can buy in just about any place that has fishing supplies. And the key here is to get a snap swivel that the snap part is large enough to fit around the eyelet on the nose cone. The actual size of the swivel doesn't make a whole lot of difference. For any rocket in this size, any snap swivel is strong enough. Okay, once you got your snap swivel, put the loop of your shroud lines through the swivel side. Okay, open that loop once more and pass now the entire snap swivel through it. Alright, and then just pull that taut and it will form a knot of the shroud lines around the loop of the swivel. Okay, now just take a very small dot of wood glue or white glue, put that on the knot, and then just work it in a little bit with your fingers. And this will just keep that knot from coming undone. Okay, and then when you're ready to hook this in, simply open up the snap part. Alright, here's my nose cone, still has putty drying on it. Alright, but then that's going to fit over that eyelet there and then snap on like that. Okay, most of the Rocketarium nose cones have a fairly thick eyelet, so this is actually about the smallest snap swivel that I can use on them. Alright, but if you don't want to store your rocket with the parachute attached, or if you need to change parachutes because one of them melted, or you want a smaller one or a bigger one, this type of a system just makes that process so much easier. Once the fins are dry, like mine are here, at least mostly dry, they're not going anywhere, we can apply the launch lug, and this is going to go up on the upper body tube here. Now, the instructions indicate to transfer or extend the line from the lower body tube to the upper body tube. That's really kind of hard to do because we're changing diameters here. And this is why I drew my lower body tube line all the way up. Because even if I can't draw it up, I can use it as a sight line and glue my launch lug on in the correct place. So the launch lug will go here, flush with the aft end of the upper body tube, and we'll attach this in much the same way we did the fins. So once again, take your wood glue or your white glue. Alright, put a small bead of glue on here. Now in this case you really don't need to wait for it to get tacky because this does not have a lot of strain on it. Alright, and now I'm going to sight down this. Got a little bit sloppy there. Alright, but I'm going to sight down the rocket and make sure that my launch lug is in line with the line further down in the body tube. Now once you have it straight, you can use a straight edge once again, like the fin alignment guide, to make sure that this is actually parallel to the tube here, and then sight through it as you would a gun sight to make sure that the alignment line down along here is in line with the launch lug. And so once again, I'm going to let this dry, and once the launch lug and the fins are completely dry, we'll add fillets to them. Okay, my launch lug is dry, as are my fins here. I managed to keep them mostly straight. They're a little bit bent on one of them, not enough to worry about repositioning it. And so now what we need to do is put fillets on all of the fins and on the launch lug. So here again we'll need our wood glue. Alright, and just go ahead and put in a bead of glue there on each side. And these are going to be really tight. Okay, so like this. And then I'm just going to take my finger here and smooth that up. And then the same on the other side. And you see I've got a lot of excess glue there, and part of that's just because there's not a lot of room inside of this. Alright, but if you're using a quick setting wood glue, you can probably go ahead and just do these all at once. As long as you keep it horizontal. Now as I go through here, I'm also going to keep some tissues ready, because if I get too much excess glue here, it's just going to make a mess. Okay, so try and remove the excess as quickly as you can, otherwise you're going to have to do a lot of sanding later. Okay, and then just continue this all the way around, and then similarly you'll do the launch lug here. This you'll have a lot more room to do your spreading and such, so it should come out neater. So much for neater. I've got way too much glue on my hands now. Okay, now before I make this a complete mess, I'm going to let the rest of that dry. I will finish doing the fins off camera, and then we will come back, and we should be about ready to finish off the nose cone. Okay, the putty is dry on this now, and so I'm going to start off with some 150 grit, just to knock down the biggest stuff. And you can see this is clogging up the paper really quickly. It's the drawback to this. So if it seems like you're doing a lot of work and nothing's happening, just shift your sandpaper a little bit. And you can see this is clogging up the paper really quickly. Okay, and then once you've got most of it smoothed down there, go ahead and change to a 220 grit. And smooth it in. Now again, in most cases, you're going to expect to lose most of the putty. And just have it remaining in the low spots. It's the drawback to this. So if it seems like you're doing a lot of work and nothing's happening. Okay, so you've got still a few areas here where we can take off some more. Alright, now in some cases you'll get where the sandpaper will pluck the putty back out. And if that happens, you basically got two choices. You can either go back and re-putty it, or you can ignore it if it's small enough that your primer will fill it in. I think that's pretty good there. Now be careful if you use the alcohol like I've used before here to wipe this down. The alcohol will dissolve the putty. So you want to be careful that you don't wipe it too much. just a quick one going over the surface here. Alright, and then I'm going to continue sanding that with a bit more 220 here. Not the putty itself, but around the rest of the nose cone. Go ahead and change to a 220 grit. Okay, and then one last thing to check. In some cases there may be some flash still filling the eyelet here, and if yours has that, go ahead and cut that out. But at this point I'm going to take this aside, mask off the shoulder, and start painting the nose cone. At this point I've put on 2 coats of primer. And you can see down here at the fins, there's some rough spots here. This is mostly where little flecks of wood have raised up and have gotten caught in the primer. That's actually a good thing, so it'll be easier to sand these. If I had sealed these fins first, I wouldn't have to do so much work at this stage. And that's really up to your own preference, where you want to put the time in. Okay. The rest of the body looks pretty good. I'm going to do a little bit of light sanding throughout here, and then add probably one more coat of primer, and then go to the paint. My nose cone was primed and painted, and this just needs another coat or two of the paint. Here I'm using a flat olive green here, and I'll use the same color for the rest of the rocket. But this the same way. Once you put the primer on, give it a light sanding, and then overcoat with the paint of your choice. My rocket is completely painted, and the very last step then is to apply the decals. And I'm going to try something here that I did with the Arcturus rocket, and that's to put some masking tape across these. So I'm putting it wrong here, and the idea here is this will allow me, in theory at least, to lift off the letters and still keep the spacing and such the way it's supposed to be. Alright, looks like I can do this with just one piece. So the idea now is to peel off the letters from the backing. There we go. Some of it may need a little help. Okay, so as I'm going through, I'm just gently pulling this back. And if something stays in place, I'll go and put a little pressure over those areas so that they stick better. And sometimes just peel them back like that. And in some cases, we'll have too much. Alright, so the center did not come out of that B. But I can come back to that and pull it off in a moment. Okay, now I just need to remove that little bit from the B. Figures that the stickiest part is the part we don't want. There we go. Okay, so now I can put this back forward, and here I want to find my launch lug. So there's my launch lug, and I want to do this on the opposite side. So now bring this over and in. Now we can simply put this across. And the tape also helps guide things here, so I'm using it as sort of a straight edge. Alright, now here we want to get everything tacked down well, in the hopes that the vinyl will stick to the rocket greater than to the tape. And it's making a liar out of me. Okay, so here we can just use your knife. Okay, and part of the difficulty here is that I do have a flat finish, which sometimes means the vinyl doesn't want to stick to it as well. So, whoop. There we go. And I just go through with a finger or thumb in this case. Okay. So now I can just reattach my shock cord here. Alright, put a little dab of glue on that. Just going to work it in there. Alright, now I'm going to trim off this piece. Alright, and just leave about 1/4 of an inch or about 6 millimeters there. Okay, and then once that glue dries, we're pretty much ready to go. You can take the parachute that we already put on a snap swivel and snap that in. And with that, this rocket is done. This was a fun little rocket. I can recommend this easily. Have a great flight, a safe recovery, and please stay tuned for more of my videos.